Welcome back, everyone, to the Ops Show. We are live, and we are here to bring you the trials and tribulations and the automations and collaborations from the world of DevOps and the greater developer experience. I'm your host, Tristan Pollock, and as always with CTO.ai founder Kyle Campbell. And in our best show yet, we have Bear Douglas, Director of Developer Relations at Slack, who has also helped build relationships with developers at Twitter and Facebook. So we're really excited to hear from that broad breadth of perspective in the developer community.
Thank you for having me and for setting me up with these high expectations. I was grooving to the intro music at the beginning.
Of course, yeah. Oh, yeah. It's my favorite intro music, and the best part is now that we are kind of experimenting with this new platform, Restream, and doing the shows live instead of recording them. We've been able to actually hear the music going into it, where I think before when we were using OBS, we never got to hear the music, so it was kind of a very quiet intro. Well, so great to have you on the show. I think the best way to kind of kick us off is give us a little bit of your code story. Like, how did you get into the developer world, and kind of walk us up to today and how you joined Slack?
Sure. Yeah. I've had kind of a meandering history in and out of coding. I was lucky enough to go to a school where they actually introduced us to programming in first grade. We used Logo and made little programs to make your turtle, draw rectangles and everything. And then we had actual programming classes taught by our school sysadmin. So he taught us Pascal for various early logic education. He taught us about circuits and everything too. And so that was really cool. And I had that all through high school. I did like the, whatever C++ curriculum they have you do in high school. And then I got to college and there was all of this other stuff that you could explore, like archaeology and economics and psychology. And so I actually didn't study computer science until the last year of college. And I was like, oh wait, I kind of liked this. But at that point it was 2009, major economic downturn. I didn't want to stay in school for another 3 years to try and get a full degree. So I was like, all right, what can I do if I cut and run with the knowledge I have? And I was pretty lucky that folks took a chance on me for a product marketing role for a developer release tool. It was a company called Strobe. And that was my first DevRel role, in that the name was marketing, but we did a lot of technical work. Like, we were trying to write a book about Sprout Core, which you might now know as Ember.js, and a whole bunch of other technical blog posts and content creation that's very much in the realm of developer relations. So after Strobe, I went to Facebook, and at Facebook, the timing was very lucky. It was 2012, and the whole world was kind of making this pivot toward native mobile. At the time, we were like, will mobile web win, or will everyone have to write these walled garden iOS and Android apps? And the answer is yes, we will have to do this and strengthen the ecosystem. So I went through and spent a bunch of time writing iOS and Android apps while at Facebook, and I did DevRel for them and for Parse, which was a backend as a service, RIP Parse. And then from there, I moved on to Twitter, where we were doing DevRel for a new mobile SDK suite called Fabric, which is now a part of Google. Some parts of it are the crash reporting pieces and all of that. Twitter's new SDK stayed with Twitter for obvious reasons. And then from there, moved on to Slack, where I've been for the last almost 4 years. So through that whole time, it's been a combination of doing technical education, partner outreach, working with people on making their integrations shine, but also a lot of the internal product work where we make sure that developer concerns are taken care of by the product team, and that there's this two-way developer user and product builder conversation happening.
Can you tell us a little bit about when you joined Slack, what the platform felt like then and what it feels like now? Because I recall when we met at Slack Spec, one of my reflections was it still feels like such early days for the platform in so many ways, but I'd love to hear your perspective over the last 4 years about sort of that progression of how the community's developed and the technology and all of the different things that you're offering developers has evolved.
Oh yeah, we've come a long way, both in terms of the platform's capabilities, but also what we've seen people doing with it. We've always had this vision for a long time that the DevOps ethos that you get with ChatOps should be available to any role. It shouldn't just be a matter of, if you've got the engineering chops to figure out some sort of integration that makes your life better, then you can have that, and other people who can't, well, too bad for you. We want that to be a little more democratized so people have access to it. And 4 years ago, when I was joining, in my interview, Cece Stahlsmith, who was at the time our product marketing lead for the platform, she's amazing. She very excitedly leaked to me that we were about to release buttons inside Slack messages. And this was a big deal. It was going to pretty much change the face of what you could do inside Slack, which before leaned heavily on natural language processing to have the chat experience. But bringing UI components in and more reactive components into Slack messages made it so that you didn't have this implicit bar of like, oh, you have to have an LLP provider, or you have to be ready to parse whatever text you're going to get in order to actually write an integration that could be useful for you. And that has kind of started this shift where we're moving things to be a little bit more user-friendly, opening up different spaces inside the Slack client. Like we've got the app home now, where 2 years ago even, if you were trying to find Google Calendar inside Slack, couldn't really find Google Calendar. Like if they allowed a DM with a bot, then yes, you could, but there wasn't like I want to see my calendar view inside Slack, and now there is. And so we're making all of these steps to make things a little bit more end user friendly so that everyone has a good experience with apps. And then we're also working hard to make it accessible for people who are not developers or who are like slightly technical. Like I feel very comfortable creating an Excel macro, but I'm not going to be able to spin up a service, host it somewhere, and write a lot of code to make something happen for my team. So you can see that in what we've done with Workflow Builder, which is designed to be as easy as pie. And we started off with a pretty limited feature set, mostly because we wanted it to feel super accessible and to not be confusing to anyone. And building something that is not confusing is actually pretty hard. Like you have to make some decisions about things like, where should a workflow appear? If all three of us work at the same company and we both have a workflow called My Tasks, and I look for my tasks in Slack, do I see all three? Do I just see mine? What does my admin see? And how do you track all of these workflows that might be floating around in the ether? So we spent a lot of time making decisions about things like how you should be able to find a workflow, kick off a workflow, and built a user interface that's clickable, just drag and drop to create those types of workflows so that you don't even have to think about coding. So it's a massive evolution in the platform capabilities that are still driving us toward this very similar vision, which is that everyone should have access to simplified work. Everyone should have access to automating rote tasks that you really don't want to be doing in your day-to-day. And more people should be able to have that awesome experience inside Slack and in their collaboration tool.
Yeah, I mean, the push towards an intuitive, accessible, what we think of as control plane, and we really positioned our integration with Home Tower on this idea of a control plane, and then the entry of Blockit and even shortcuts and now Workflow Builder. I mean, it all really pushes that forward incredibly. But at the same time, one of the things that I know is true is managing this dichotomy between the developers who want to get in the weeds with the SDKs and let's call them the primitives, and then the end user functionality. One of the things that I'm really excited about is Bolt, which is trying to find that middle ground in how a developer builds a product. Can you tell us a little bit about Bolt and where Bolt's going?
Definitely. So in Bolt, we thought hard about how we could make it friendly to the community that already exists. So in Bolt, you might see shadows of its predecessor, Slap, which was created by Robots and Pencils, the same group that created Missions. But we knew that there was demand for a more robust framework with better helpers from the rise of Botkit. Like we knew that Botkit was super popular for a good reason. It made it much easier to create a bot, but it also had a limited feature set inside Slack because it was trying to be platform agnostic. And so you always get those trade-offs with any type of tool that in being platform agnostic means that you kind of get the common denominators that are among all the platforms. And so we took the decision to build a more robust framework quite seriously. It wasn't something that we wanted to embark on lightly, both because we wanted to make sure that people who were already using other frameworks, like whether it was Hubot, whether it was Botkit, felt still taken care of and were able to access the tools in the way that they wanted to use them. But we also wanted to make sure that we were building something that could keep up and keep pace with Slack's modern feature set. So that was the reasoning behind Bolt. And as you can probably see, we've been making many more investments into it. We've got Bolt for Java, Bolt for Python now. Started off with JavaScript. And we're going to be continuing to make investments in Bolt in that way. We try, of course, to keep feature availability in Bolt whenever we have anything new coming out in platforms, so people who are using Bolt can rely on being able to have the latest and greatest. And we're really excited to see the response that we have. We've got a pretty engaged community on GitHub, and it's been a kind of wild, only 1.5 years that it's been out. But Bolt Python, very new.
Yeah, I've talked a lot with Anchor and then Steve as well. And Steve had a great presentation on it at Frontiers just a couple of weeks ago. And one of the things I really admire about how you approach this, and I was not so much aware that you're moving now into Java and these other languages as well, but it is a more opinionated way. It's more integrated with sort of an express feel and meets the developer maybe at the tooling level that they're used to, opposed to the older SDKs where sort of you can do it any way you want to. And there's such a broad surface area for you then to support. Talk to us a little bit about Frontiers. How did that go? Because there was a huge presence around the developer and the platform team. And I thought it was really great.
Well, thank you. I'm glad that you had a good experience. It was all experimental in that, we're all working in this new virtual format. And I think we spent a lot of time trying to figure out how we could make it interactive and engaging for the people who showed up on the day of. So we had the Slack workspace going. We had chats happening inside the broadcast tool itself. And it was a really great way to connect with a lot of people who came and showed up for Frontiers, the event. And just in the way that it's so nice when you have the hallway track and you have a moment to meet, like Kyle, like we met at Spec and had a chance to just sit down and chat through some of the stuff that you're thinking about for CTO.ai. So I think it went pretty well. I mean, we have some things that we're really excited about. Socket mode being one of them. For those of you who have not worked with our API before, in the olden days, the first version of our API, we called it the real-time messaging API, and it was a socket-based connection where we would pipe essentially the fire hose of everything happening in Slack down to you. But in time since then, we have an events-based API, so we can notify you instead of you having to deal with the whole fire hose. But the limitation for that for a lot of our customers is that opening up an endpoint to receive those events to the public web is kind of a non-starter. So what socket mode enables you to do is continue to connect through a socket, so you can punch out through your firewall, and then we'll pipe those events down the pipe to you. And this is something that we are super excited about because there's a whole bunch of developers who would really like to use our stuff, but they were just completely limited by the fact that they only had access to RTM, which didn't have some of the finer points of block it. You couldn't use the app home or shortcuts or anything with RTM. And now we're going to be radically changing that. So being able to talk to developers about that was super exciting because this is something that's been in the works for a while.
Yeah. And I think, obviously one of the things that I hear there is the shift to having Spec, which was this developer specific conference, to more this integrated model with business and developers in Frontiers. You found a lot of success in that. And it sounds like that's sort of the plan going forward for how to run these events. Is that correct?
Yeah. I mean, as of now, who knows, there might be Spec 2025, but we wouldn't. But for now, keeping it rolled up into one Frontiers, I think it has been really effective.
That's great. And then the other thing you're calling out there is events. And I know, having talked with Steve quite a lot, he wrote a blog post recently. I think it was on, I forget the website, but I shared it on LinkedIn and sort of started talking about this idea of the event-driven enterprise. I know this was also something that was communicated a bit at during the Frontiers keynote. Would you mind diving into that a little bit and tell us a little bit more about how socket mode and this event structure sets up the next sort of generation of what we can expect from the platform?
Totally. So it's kind of a continuation of everything that we've come to be known for at Slack. Like one of the earliest things that you could do inside Slack was set up a webhook to notify you that something had happened in another service. And the reason it was advantageous to put that in Slack is because that's where you were working with your team. That's where people were paying attention and it's where they were responsive. But in the early versions of the webhook, that was it. Like we sent you the webhook payload, and then you had to figure out what your next step was. But the whole point, like I said, of bringing it into Slack is that there's a so what. You're getting notified for a reason. You're trying to keep track of all these things and the things that you have to do next and the people that you have to talk to in order to take a next step. That's all happening in Slack. And so when we say the event-driven enterprise, it's new language for something that already is. Like your workday is kind of an event loop, right? Like you're waiting for people to interact with you, and if someone says like, "Hey, can you do this task?" you respond, and sure, you have some things that you might already have decided to do, but the expectation is that you're responsive to people around you and receiving their requests for your help. So when we talk about the event-driven enterprise and we talk about Slack as the engagement layer, it really just means that Slack is where you can talk to people and get that next step, so what, from all the events that require human attention. Because there are plenty of system events that may or may not require you, a person, to make a decision or do a thing. Something might just be that, like a button click means that you should serve a page to one of your customers. That's an event that doesn't require human attention, but your customer clicking a button that says, "Please connect me to your support team," probably requires human attention. And so what we're thinking about how we can do better is through the platform, making it possible for people to sift through these events and make sure that the ones that require human attention get human attention in a really efficient way. So, maybe there's a workflow that hangs off the notification you get. Maybe there's a button that you click that can launch your next process. And that's all what we're trying to encapsulate there. So some of it is new-ish, but most of it is just sort of a continuation of what we're seeing and how people behave in Slack.
I love it. I think it's one of those things where we care a lot about developer productivity, and the two driving factors in our mind are, simplicity of access to commoditized tools, which we already talked about earlier on, making it easier to do the work that you do through workflow builder, shortcuts, even commands and the home tab. But then this event piece, which is great, is it's sort of that promise that we can start to manage the context switch, which we know is so disruptive to developers who have to spend 4 hours loading these programs in their head. And that's where Slack is one of those tools that can be a double-edged sword in that regard. But having an approach to being able to actually set the workflow up to optimize how you manage your own attention, I think is going to be a game changer for how we take the tools into Slack. I know you were going to share a bit more for the developers who follow the show about resources that are available. And I think you had some things that you were going to share. Maybe this is a good time to dig into that.
Totally, yeah. So I was going to show you a little bit about Workflow Builder. Many of you might have used it or you might not have. It's actually inside the Slack client. So I'm going to page over to Slack and give me 1 second. You can share my screen whenever. Is it being shared?
It is now, yep.
Okay, cool. So this assumes that you have a paid Slack workspace. That is one limitation for Workflow Builder. But if you do, you can page over to the upper left-hand corner where your workspace name is, pop a node down to Tools and click Workflow Builder. And so in here, you have the option to create a responsive workflow that can be triggered by a few different types of action. So you can see in here that the ones that we've built into our community workspace are for things like submitting an AMA question. So we have a channel where we gather all the questions and then a channel where people answer them, and posting permissions are, of course, limited to the people who are supposed to be answering the questions in the AMA. We've got a workflow for things like requesting swag for your meetup group or anything like that there. So I'm going to go ahead and create one, and we're going to...
That's a great one. Are there templates? I remember talking to Mike at one point about templates. That swag request one is one that we need for our community there, Tristan.
Totally. Yeah. It's very, very helpful. So I'll show you, templates is a great question, and we will get to that in just 1 second. Or actually, we can click on import. No, never mind. That doesn't bring up. No, that's if you already have the template JSON downloaded. If you want to start with a template, you page over to templates.
Oh, right.
And we have a few in here that were pretty commonly requested, particularly after the shift to remote work and after COVID. A lot of people wanted things like, we want an easier way to send a happy welcome to people who are new. We want to have an easier way to collect status updates from the team. So we can start with that, and might as well kick it off from a template. So we first have to attach it to a channel. Workflows, this was something I alluded to before, but when I was talking about how if all three of us had a workflow that had the same name and we attached it to a channel, how would this work? You know what, actually, I'm going to pop out real quick and I'm going to create a private channel that is just for mucking around right now. And we're going to call it mucking around on camera. And it's going to be private to me. I'm going to put all my output in there just so I don't bother our community. And we're going to skip that for now.
The hardest thing about creating things is naming things. I definitely believe.
So, okay, let's head back to this status update for the team setup. So this should go to our mucking around on camera channel. And we'll call it, it's called the status update. And guess what? It's all ready to rock. If I clicked publish, it would just be ready right now, but I'm going to quickly walk you through what it actually does. So there are a few things that can trigger a workflow. And once you've selected a trigger, you actually can't go back and edit that trigger. So this one is triggered by a shortcut, which is that lightning bolt that's on the left-hand side of your text entry box inside Slack. And so when somebody clicks that, they'll see the short name, which is status update. So what happens then? ... It creates a form, and this form says, it's got title, report work status, where are you working today, any other details to share. If I wanted to add a question here, I could. If I wanted to swap the order of these questions, I could pretty easily. And then it sends a message to the channel where the workflow started saying, this person is working from here today. So straightforward, let's click publish. It's ready to use. So let's open it up. And Workflow Builder will also just let you know that this is now available in channel. So you can click on this, put in the status update. Where are you working today? I am working from home. Any other details to share? I could use a coffee. And so now it tags me in and it says working from home today. I could use a coffee. So that was what we were aiming for when we said super easy to use. Like I clicked through to show you what was going on there, but basically it's, I think 4 clicks, maybe 5 to go from that template to having it deployed into Slack and ready to use. But since you all are developers, I imagine you want to poke a little bit deeper into what Workflow Builder can do.
Power user mode. This seems like one of the most complicated parts of this. And I know we've really thought a lot about these more complex workflows. And the thing that seems to always be the hardest things is the inputs and the outputs and the contracts between the steps. Yeah. It'd be great to dig a little bit into how somebody would add, say, like a custom step if they were writing their own code.
Oh, yeah. I didn't prepare a demo for that for today.
That's okay. Maybe you could just describe it a bit.
Possible.
Would this be something that would maybe call a Bolt application or call your own webhook API? Is that generally you add it through your application profile? And
yes, it absolutely could. So you add it as part of a Slack app. So maybe before we get into steps from apps, we can walk through what it's like to consume data from a webhook and then post that into Slack. And then that kind of sets up the inputs and outputs concept a bit. Okay, cool. So we're gonna call this just a webhook example. And so here's your total list of triggers here. There's the shortcut button, so you can have something on click. You can have something fire automatically whenever someone joins a channel. That might be something like sharing your code of conduct or any sort of information in your team channel that somebody new needs to know. You can have things respond to an emoji. So for example, if anytime somebody sends in a feedback idea that you think is a great idea and you want it logged to your best feedback suggestions spreadsheet, you could click that emoji and fire it off. You can do things at a scheduled date and time. So if every day at 10 a.m. you want to do a quick in-channel stand-up, that's a good trigger for you. And then we've also got this webhook option here. So I'm going to go there and click webhook. And so what will happen here is I will get the URL for my web request after I've hit publish here. So I'm going to pop over to GitHub and I am going to go to an ancient Android app of mine. I think I lost touch of this in June 15th, 2016. Okay, so not the most ancient, but pretty ancient. And I'm going to set up a webhook in GitHub for anytime somebody stars this. So just go through, add a webhook. Come on. Okay. And one of the things that I need to do here is make sure that it's sending me JSON. And then I'm going to say select individual events, do something. Yeah, pushes is fine, but stars, let's take that. And in order for this to work, I need to have a URL where I'm going to send this payload. So something helpful about GitHub in here is that they show you the payload, and I believe it's called action. So we're going to add a variable here. We know that the payload that GitHub's going to send me about the fact that something got starred is going to be called action. And so I'm going to take that key, the JSON key, and right now we only support the top level of an object. So if something's nested, you won't be able to access sub fields within JSON object, but we're going to stick with action. And now that we've got that as a variable, we click next. And so when we receive that webhook, let's just send a message. Not create a form, just send a message, and we'll send it into our mucking around on camera channel. And it should say, hello. A star was, and then we can insert the variable, action. Okay, so now we're going to click save. And all this is going to do is when the webhook fires, it's going to post something into the channel. So we're going to hit publish.
This is for pushing events into Slack and using and then triggering a workflow, correct?
Yes, and then triggering a workflow off of that event being pushed into Slack. And so here, now that we've hit publish, we've got this URL where we can send GitHub to say, all right, this is where you should send that event when the time comes. Just pop that in here. Again, main thing to make sure of is just that the content type is application JSON. And we're going to add this webhook. Oh no, what happened here? Did I misremember? 400. Empty required field action. Okay.
They may have changed their payload a bit.
They might have changed their payload a bit. Oh man, okay, let's.
This is a natural part of the process.
maybe
it
try
always
use
happens on camera.
Yeah, live demos, yeah.
Let's actually try that star action and see what error message that gives me. Okay, so, oops. This was not the one that we just sent. Okay, but
it may not send it if the first one 400s, but you also may have to refresh the page possibly. Now I'm going into debugging mode with you. I really want to see this work.
Yeah, so it looks like we've got Zen. Sure, let's just for the sake of getting through this demo a little bit faster, let's edit this to be instead of action, it's Zen. And it's gonna spit out whatever we got there. Okay, publish those changes. Now let's retry this guy. Redeliver, please. Yes, thank you. Whew,
there you go. Oh, the second one did work. The second one definitely did work.
The second one definitely did work. Okay.
Yeah.
A star was created. A star was avoid administrative distraction. So that's where Zen fits. And so if you've got something that is like, if you look at this payload structure here, there's a lot that is in second and third levels. Mm-hmm. So something a little bit simpler might have worked better for the purposes of this demo, but it's pretty straightforward to set up that notification in here. Right now it's showing a continue button because that's how I set it up to do something. So that continue button could take me out to a web page. It could take me to some further action and so on. So that's an option that you have if you don't want to set up any sort of backend. You've got something that's pretty straightforward and can live just in Slack, and just needs to be something straightforward coming off of a webhook type notification. But as you might have seen in our webhook example, when I add a step, I have options here to create a spreadsheet row, delete a spreadsheet row, and add things inside Google Sheets. So this is something that is in the recently launched Steps from Apps, where if you have the Google Drive app inside Slack, it has the option for your admin to be able to install a workflow step where you can connect to that app through Workflow Builder. So in most concrete terms, like something that's helpful to look through here is this spreadsheet row step. So what I can do here is I could say add a spreadsheet row every time this was fired if I wanted to keep this stored somewhere. I do have to connect a new account. Yeah, I guess I can just kind of do that. Let's do it. Great. I trust and allow all of these things. And this was closed. Okay, great. So now I can search some of my spreadsheets, which probably shouldn't flash too much on camera. There's one called test, so I'm going to run over that. So in test, there's only sheet 1, and I have no idea where this is going to go. So I should probably create something here, but basically it needs to have at least one column defined, but I can take some of the variable content from my webhook that's been pinged in and add it to that spreadsheet row. So if, for example, I wanted to grab the user ID of whoever had starred my repo and send that to a spreadsheet, I could say, like, here's a list of all of the people who are in our community now and who we might want to, reach out to say, hey, so glad you're following our repo. Can we send you a sticker? Whatever it is. So I'm going to pause there, and it would be good if I could pause sharing my screen in case I can maybe pull up some stuff.
You can really see how this sets the foundation for that tone of the event-driven enterprise, where each of these steps basically has an event where you can route those events from external tools or internal Slack actions. One of the things I think is really interesting is when there's sort of that bi-directional context of communication. So we just showed incoming events, but then having an app, building an app, which then can also send those events back out through your Google Sheet example. I mean, I think that creates the real powerful feedback loop within this concept of the event loop that you described earlier.
Totally.
Yeah, and I feel like it's like it's kind of a, you start thinking of workflow builder or just workflows in general, it starts to kind of like redefine your mental map of like how things get done. And you start thinking about everything as a workflow. And what's cool with Slack as a collaboration tool is now you can actually take that and make everything a workflow within the same place that you're, handling all your communication with your team. So then even like that, these communication channels, there might be all wholly new ways to actually manage some of these flows and how people identified and reduce context switching and, basically just, automate and improve and optimize your daily flow, and even on these like little tasks.
Totally. And I've got this back together if you want to see it. So I found test and I named the column for GitHub content. And then in here, what I just did was click the insert variable. So I can pull Zen. And if I wanted to also map another column to the person who clicked that, actually, why don't we do that real quick? Let's say test GitHub column, person who clicked. And might need to refresh this. Let's try again. Add the step, add a spreadsheet row. We're going for test. We're going for sheet 1, GitHub content, should be Zen. Add the column, person who clicked.
Yeah.
Should be person who clicked, continue. So then we're going to save. And we're going to publish those changes.
So easy to publish the changes as well. That's really nice.
Super, super quick here. So now we're going to unstar, restar, double check that all went through okay. Looks like it did. Good. So then we're going to page over to Slack. Oh, I have too many windows open, too many workflow builder windows open.
I don't think that triggered another one.
I don't think it did.
I think Slack has a UI bug maybe where you have to refresh the page or redeliver or something. It's a little bit interesting. There you go. That looked right.
Hopefully that did it. Okay, here we go.
There you go.
Start was avoid. Yep, and I'm going to click continue. And now we're going to pop over to test. Avoid restriction content. Person who clicked is Bear.
It's great.
All right.
Yeah. Good job.
The demo is done. That was really great to see.
Demo. Good job. It's never as nice as if there's not a little bit of turbulence that you got to get through in these live demos to show the troubleshooting process. Yeah, no, it's great.
If it's too slick, it's not real.
It's recorded. It was recorded. Yeah. Great.
Well, I mean that I think along the lines of like, workflow builder, and I'm kind of curious, like, how does Slack use Slack? Like, what are some of like the most frequently used things, either in workflow builder or just with like commands, or what are some of the things that you use the most frequently with your team on a daily basis?
Lots of different things. So we have a channel convention around feedback by product team. So if you, for example, have feedback on workflows, you can find the feedback workflows channel. And usually those have a workflow for submitting feedback so that the team can get the structured input that they want, instead of things that are freeform and might be missing details like, did a customer report this? Is this a nice to have? Is this urgent? Whatever else. And so they've turned those into workflows. And so there are lots and lots of teams at Slack, and not just engineering teams, who take in any request for their team through a workflow, or sometimes even through an app. Like our IT team takes in requests for things like getting a new laptop or getting software distributed. It's ultimately backed by Jira, but the interface is inside Slack for making tickets and interacting about any requests that you have. We also have a triage bot that helps us look through the number of issues that have been reported by people, and how many of them have been looked at by the on-call, and whether people have been responding. It also takes care of escalations in an automated fashion. So somebody from customer support can click on something to kick off an escalation flow to make sure that there are eyes on a current issue that a lot of customers are seeing. What else? We have apps and workflows all over the place. we have a lot of silly ones. We have one workflow that is just a slot machine that assigns you a random number of coins when you pull the handle, and it pops it into a random channel, and it's a surprisingly popular one. Let's see, what else?
What are some of the most common, maybe not even just inside of Slack, but in the broader community, what are some of the most common DevOps related workflows? And a second part of that question, which is actually a hard one, which I've been struggling to understand, but actually was posed to me by Cal, Slack's CTO. What do you think is the major barrier to adopting more of these developer workflows in Slack? And I think that comes back to some of that dichotomy that we talked about earlier between the complexity of things that developers need and their sort of gravitation to GitOps, and then the simplicity. How do you see that world sort of developing, both where we're at and where things go?
Yeah, I think we need to do a much better job knowledge sharing, both in terms of what we do at Slack and what our customers are doing, because in a lot of these cases, you have to see it to be it. Like here's a great example. The LA Times, 3 or maybe even 4 years ago, wrote an app to help them with news publication, where when a story came in and it was approved by editorial, there was an editorial channel where you had buttons that you could click to publish that story automatically to latimes.com in the section that was specified by the title of the button. And at that time, that was incredible. It was incredibly useful for the LA Times. But in order to even think of that, to have conceived of that as a process that you could put in Slack, requires a certain amount of pre-existing knowledge of how Slack works and the ways that it could be simplified. Even finding the problem to be solved required a baseline of knowledge that not everybody had. And so when it comes to the things that are holding people back, I think a lot of it is just they don't know that there are better ways or ways that they could learn from other people. And one of the great things about the developer community is that people are pretty open about sharing the ways that they handle things. They talk about it a lot. They blog about it. And there is that knowledge share happening. A great example is incident management is something that lots of people spend a bunch of time on doing well in Slack. And there's a company called Monzo that has completely open sourced their incident management bot for Slack. And that is a huge step forward for people to even be able to talk about the nitty-gritty details about how this actually works with their various systems. Things like, when do you spin up a new channel for an incident? Do you keep everything in one incident channel? Do you have an external system of record for a retro? How do all of these things come together? And what are you using Slack for? What are you using external systems for? And is the app doing a lot of brokering, or is the app kind of being self-contained for the incident management process? And it's one thing to be able to see a screenshot of how somebody did it and talk at a high level at a conference about this is our process. And another thing entirely when you can install it and try it for yourself. Oh yeah, that's awesome. Whoever put in that Monzo blog post.
I guess Tristan sharing the link. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's, I have a similar perspective on this. My hypothesis is that when, especially for, let's step out of incident management. We see a lot of people use our platform for incident management. We also see release management as one of the other big ones, which is big because of that observability of something being updated, such as the publishing example that you described, right, is really powerful. But I think when Cal asked me that question, I spent probably 3 months just like really, it's like, man, he zinged me because he was sort of, what I started to realize was it wasn't so much about Slack. I think it's about chat in general. I think we had the same challenges with things like Freenode or any other chat protocol. And the idea of chat ops creates a natural sort of challenge and a divergence in how the developers will typically work. And I think the natural tendency had always been, well, I can build a CLI for that. And so that's why our hypothesis was, well, maybe you don't have to pick and choose. Maybe we can help you build a CLI that just also runs in Slack. And now you sort of get both worlds, and we can maintain some sort of polymorphism to bring down that cost of deciding A or B, and you kind of get the benefits of both worlds. And so I think that brought us to this sort of place where we thought and released the idea of Slack Ops earlier this year with the goal of trying to maintain this idea of a workflow that is portable. And I think you start to see that really clearly with where you're going with events, because now that event can be triggered from an external tool. I think that's a really big game changer for especially developer workflows, because my hypothesis has always been that some companies just will never adopt as much chat ops because they have to make this decision of where to spend their time. And it's maybe more natural to build a CLI for certain types of things than to embed it in Slack.
Totally.
What are your thoughts on that?
I think that's where the question of system events and human events, and also systems of record and systems of communication, come into play. And again, one of the reasons that this is a barrier to more teams doing it is that this actually requires some amount of thought and like a deep understanding of the model of both how you work and also how Slack exists, which is kind of a tall order in some ways. So in thinking through like what belongs in a CLI versus what really needs human attention. And then also suppose you do a bunch of stuff from CLI. Who needs to see the steps that you went through in that process? Does it need to be surfaced to other people? Where does that record live, either in the moment and long term, and who has access to it? All of those are questions that you have to answer to figure out how all of this should live. And the answer might not be the same for every organization. But that's why it's so important to see models and to see tools that do some of this thinking for you to filter out, all right, these are the things that are human events. People need to know about this stuff. People need to see the record, versus these are processes that I can kick off that a machine can do, but I probably need to have some record that I kicked it off with a set of machines. So, somebody doesn't duplicate effort or do something that conflicts with the way that I'm handling this. So making those choices and figuring out what's a human event, what's a system event, and where we see which of them is the real kicker.
Yeah. Where does some of this education, because this is really deep systems thinking, right?
It is.
But is there a place where some of this thinking is emerging within the broader community, or even within how you're working with developers and different companies to think through these procedures? Where do people go to sort of encapsulate this systems level thinking?
So some of it is happening, in the community, like in the Slack workspace, at conferences when people talk about their process. It's happening in blog posts that people are sharing about how they think this through. And honestly, it's developers and partners who are building things for a market who often have put in the most time, because this is your product, this is your bread and butter. And so we do like to amplify the voices of people who have spent a lot of time thinking about how this should work, because that saves people a lot of time and pain figuring it out by trial and error, by doing.
Yeah, that's great.
I hear a little background noise there.
A little background noise. I think that's nice.
Well, yeah, thank you so much, Bear. This has been really great. I think it's been a great chance to dive a little bit deeper, look under the hood and what Slack's doing. We're big fans of Slack Ops and, building your workflows into Slack. Where are any last words, any shout outs you'd like to make? And then where's the best place to find you online?
Best place to find us online is slackcommunity.com. That's our gateway to our workspace where we chat with everybody, and a bunch of our resources there as well. And also just api.slack.com to get started with our API. Bolt and all of our sample code lives on GitHub under GitHub/Slack API. And yeah, it's been a real pleasure chatting with you all. Thank you so much for having me on the show.
Yeah,
Of course. Yeah, we'll drop those links into the description on YouTube when we publish that. And thank you for everyone for tuning in. I think that's about all we have time for now. And we'll look forward to you. Make sure to hit the heart or the subscribe button so that you can always know when we're doing a weekly video, which we do every week. That's it for the Op Show, and I'll take us out. Thanks, Barry.
Thanks,
Thank
Barry.
you.